Hello, everyone, and welcome to Governance Live, another in our series that is leading up to Governance Week 2024. It's been an awesome and hectic period leading up to Governance Week, but a really great one because we are actually almost at our registration period where we are fully registered for Governance Week 2024, which is extremely wonderful, no doubt because our opening keynote is Professor John Elkington, who is such an authority on the subject, especially with his model of the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit. So leading up to Governance Week, we have had a number of guests, and today I'm so happy that we have Ali Matalon. And Ali, as you can see by her name, is the Chief Executive Officer of CorpCare. She is from Jamaica, and she will be one of our panelists for Governance Week 2024 as well. Ali, welcome to Governance Live.
Thank you so much, Kamla. I am absolutely delighted to be here, and I'm so looking forward to the week of festivities.
Absolutely. So, Ali, I just want to ask you first to share a little bit about yourself and your interest in governance.
Sure. So for anyone listening in who I haven't had the privilege of meeting yet, as Kamla mentioned, my name is Ali. I'm the CEO of CorpCare. We are an impact consultancy headquartered in Kingston, Jamaica, but we service clients across the region. And we do this by primarily leveraging environmental, social, and governance criteria as a framework for monitoring and evaluating impact for businesses. So, one of the things that we talk about a lot is getting the data, really outlining what the baseline is for an entity and really improving on that baseline. And a huge part of, our impetus for doing this is that, and it's talked about a lot in the space, is that we feel transformation can be achieved through greater transparency. And that actually leads me perfectly into what I am so passionate about in terms of governance. I feel as though governance is really the underpinning framework that enables environmental and social solutions and strategies to be effective within organizations and within our society. It's a crucial component of sustainable development and economic growth. It ensures accountability, it ensures transparency, it ensures that we are adhering to the rule of law, make sure that we're adhering to regulatory requirements and so on. So I'm deeply passionate about that alignment. And so often when I work with organizations, we talk about getting that governance piece first. And we even talk about it from the perspective of creating an ESG governance structure that sits within your existing governance structure so that ESG doesn't become siloed. Because if businesses integrate it into their wider governance structure and their existing hierarchy or whatever type of way in which they organize their entity, we feel as though it will be much, much more effective. So I think that, it is the entry point to all effective strategy. And, I obviously know that you're very passionate about it, Kamla, so I'm sure that we like-minded in this area.
Yes, absolutely. The role of the board is fundamental to the success of many of these initiatives within the organization. So, but I want to ask you, what drew you first to the area? Was it social impact that you were interested in, and then you saw the alignment to the role of the board involved, and what specifically about social impact that is your key interest?
Sure. So when we started CorpCare, I think we did so with this belief that there is a space between what people really need and what governments can meaningfully provide, especially in developing regions, where we are so beholden to foreign lenders, for example. And companies have an opportunity, whether through corporate philanthropy, corporate social responsibility, and now ESG, to support in closing that gap, right? And so that's the lens through which I viewed social impact through the private sector as an opportunity. And I'm particularly attracted to ESG because of the governance component. I think sometimes we talk about corporate philanthropy or we talk about social impact very much in a feel-good realm, right? We talk about it in, what can we do to give back to our society? What can we do to enable the next generation to live in a more sustainable, resilient environment? But we haven't really put parameters around, defining what that means, metricizing what that means. And governance is such a strong, it's the concept that underpins putting in place those types of systems, right?
Yes.
And so despite ESG's bad press, particularly, in the US, for example, I think it's incredibly valuable from that perspective, right? That we put these guardrails around, okay, how is our business strategy aligned to our social impact strategy, aligned to our environmental strategy, and so on, such that this becomes a seamless part of our operations and not an additional or a sidecar initiative that's being done. And that way we make it measurable. And once we make it measurable, we make sure that it gets done, right?
Yes.
And we also, we kind of have this innate desire as humans that when we're measuring something, we want to do better, we want to do better, we want to do better. Yeah. And so when we're putting that in place, that infrastructure to be more transparent and accountable, I think that the impetus to do better increases, right? The motivation to do better increases. And
Yes.
that makes me super excited.
Yes, we'll come back to the discussion around measurement and so, but I want to learn a little bit more about your interest first. What drew you into this area? Was it your studies, an area that you specialized in?
Sure. So my studies were a little bit of a roundabout route to ESG and to governance. I always thought that I wanted to be a part of the political landscape in Jamaica. I always thought that, crafting policy and being a governmental actor would lead to the ultimate kind of positive social impact in so many ways. But I found, just the challenges of that system, particularly as somebody who is quite entrepreneurial, very difficult to navigate, right? And I wanted to get closer to impact faster. And I felt as though if I tried to create policy or create infrastructure within the private sector, I may be able to see the return on investment sooner. I try and stay as close to policymaking initiatives as possible because I'm really very passionate about that. But I think that just from a personal interest perspective, project-based work is very attractive to me. I'm able to look at a diverse set of problems all the time. And so all of my degrees actually have either been business or political science, which has served me nicely in marrying these two concepts. I've done a lot of work in kind of advocacy, nonprofits. I serve on the board of Multicare Youth Foundation here locally. I work a lot with 876 Volunteer, and actually through that initiative and through that organization, I was seeing just how philanthropic corporate entities were. And I felt as though there was such a strong culture of giving back with corporate entities in Jamaica, that should be capitalized on in a way to make it more effective. And I think, so just a combination of my experiences, what I studied, as you said, and my personality, right? You have to take into consideration kind of who you are as a person in terms of defining your professional trajectory. And I really find that I thrive on working on lots of different problems, and creating, unique solutions. And so that's really how I got into this space. I hope that answers your question.
Well, to a great extent, but it's just that I find that you are really so good in expressing so many issues around social impact. So for someone to become as articulate as you, because there may be a lot of persons interested in this area as well. What are the things they need to do that's going to help them learn and grow so they feel more confident and reflect this wonderful aura you have?
Thank you, Kamla. I so appreciate that. So I think, one of the things that I feel very privileged to have done is spent a lot of time volunteering with organizations who are the recipients of impact dollars, right? And I think when you start to understand just how massive the challenges are, how little capacity there exists for growth, particularly if there's not a lot of capital injection into the space, it gives you so much more perspective on how to, reverse engineer and solve the problem, right? How do you go back to corporates and communicate that it's not meaningful for you to invest in, let's say, teachers education if you're a food manufacturer, right? It might be more impactful for you to invest in farming and agricultural processing and so on, right? Where your skills can be lent to those organizations and their skills can be lent to yours, right? So I think, just spending time really getting to understand the problem, and understanding that typically you don't have the solution, right? People closest to the problem are the ones who have the solution. I think when we engage in a space and we think we can fix this, we can do this, usually, that's not necessarily the case, right? The enthusiasm is fantastic, but we really want to be listening to stakeholders who are closest to the challenge. And I think that, outside of that privilege to go and volunteer and that privilege of having time and space to grow, without the pressure of, earning a tremendous amount of income and so on is a privilege that I have to recognize in getting to where I have been. And so I understand that that's not available to everyone. Another avenue that I pursued a lot in getting to a place of doing this work on a regular basis were free online courses. I take in as much information as humanly possible all the time. I'm constantly listening to podcasts. I'm constantly doing courses online, constantly trying to speak with people. I think your network is always going to be your greatest resource. Unfortunately, I think in the Caribbean, we have such close-knit communities that sometimes the privilege of your birth determines the network that you have access to. And that's one of the things that I would really like to work on changing, because it's so important for us to be able to connect with like-minded professionals from every walk of life, and to really learn from each other as a way of, developing ourselves, but also enriching our communities with our perspective too. So lots of different things, and I think whatever lights you up is likely going to be the thing that you're best at, and the thing that you do in the most natural way. So as much as you have the opportunity to pursue that, I would encourage it.
Yes, great. Well, I love you. You are showing an example of how you can volunteer your time, and just that volunteerism will extend your network and help you to learn and grow in so many respects. It's a passion of mine too, that people should contribute of their time to NGOs, because that's where we can make a lot of difference.
Sure. And particularly people at a certain place in their career too, right? Because one of the things that I feel I've benefited the most from as well is mentorship. And being able to ask for mentorship from people who I admire and trust their opinion and judgment.
Yes, great. All right. Thank you so much. Now, I want to talk about an area that I think is the greatest challenge for us in the region, and that is where you are actually involved. And that is, how do we persuade organizations to collect the data that's going to help us be able to measure impact? To me, that's one of the biggest challenges that faces organizations. So what would you say to an organization that really is keen on trying to change their operation so that they have less adverse impact, but they're steeped in having done it this way for the last few decades?
For sure. No, that's a great question, and a question I get all the time. When I first started doing this work and when CorpCare was first founded, we were like, do this out of the goodness of your heart, like do this because you're a good person and a good corporate citizen and so on. And that's just not, for most CEOs or CFOs, just not a sufficient sell, right? And it's why I love triple bottom line accounting so much. It's a principle that we certainly abide by at CorpCare, and a framework that we leverage. But I think a few things are happening that are making it almost impossible, particularly for larger scale entities, to not do this and do this well. The first is capital inflow. So we're seeing, entities like a Citibank, for example, offer preferential loan rates to organizations who have a robust ESG framework. The other is that, we're seeing multilateral financiers like, an IDB, IFC, a World Bank, and so on require ENS disclosures as a part of their financing package. We're also seeing a lot of investor pressure, even private investor pressure. So we're seeing investors want not only financial disclosures, but non-financial disclosures and metrics to compare entities against as well. Because whether that be their kids who are the next generation that is going to inherit their wealth, or whether it's their own philosophy and perspective, more and more people are interested in ESG rated funds or impact investing. And they don't feel as though, whereas in the past, they would have to compromise on returns for that, they're not seeing that as necessarily the case anymore. I was in a lecture recently with UBS where they're saying that the majority of their investments are managed sustainably, unless an investor requires otherwise, which is really interesting to see such a big financial institution make that commitment. And then fourth, and probably most importantly, regulation, right? So, well, regulation and then supplier pressure as well. So for instance, if you are a regional exporter to the UK, let's say, the UK has a number of requirements very similar to the EU CSRD that requires disclosures around non-financial metrics that either you have the data for or you don't have the data for, and it puts your business in tremendous risk if you don't, because it's very likely that these businesses will no longer import your products if you do not meet the requirements that they're asking you to meet. And that has been a huge driver that we see in clients coming to us to prepare impact reporting, put in place data management infrastructure for collection and analysis. And then, of course, that supply chain pressure extends beyond regulatory requirements, right? Because different organizations are beholden to different stakeholders, different financiers, and so they have different interests and needs. And you're seeing that even, in Jamaica Stock Exchange businesses, publicly traded Trinidadian businesses, you're seeing more and more where they're putting out impact reporting that speaks to questions their suppliers or their partners would certainly be asking, but also anticipates what the future of regulatory requirements may look like. And a lot of that has been helped along by the IFRS's standards 1 and 2, which is trying to create a little bit more universality around what we call the alphabet soup of ESG frameworks right now. That was a lot of information, but I think those are kind of the primary drivers. And I just want to conclude by saying that the IMF has estimated that the financial needs or the capital investment needs to enable a just transition towards a climate resilient future for the Caribbean to be over $100 billion. We're seeing things like, the Caribbean Community Resilience Fund be birthed, whether that be from, the CARICOM Development Fund, IDB, and so on, for, $100 million. And that's a drop in the bucket towards $100 billion, right? So we're going to need more and more funds like that. And that's a huge business opportunity as well, that investors can or private equity firms or, non-traditional investment vehicles can step up to the plate and answer that call, because it will be the most amount of money our region has seen if capital inflows start to reflect that number. Because we are just the most vulnerable region in the world right now.
Okay. Now that to me was a lot of new information, because as much as I'm very interested in governance and I do try to follow a lot, see, this is part of the tremendous value we get from these conversations, because otherwise I would not have known that, and that's awesome news. So it is definitely a very encouraging for a lot of our businesses to get on this path.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it takes away some of the pressure of what used to obtain. And I hope it has taken away some of the pressure, because the reality is there's a lot of investment, first of all, in having to redo your operations to accommodate less adverse impact on the environment. And that has always been the challenge for a lot of CEOs, because you are being measured by your profit margin. It is taking a long time, as much as we have been saying over and over, global warming, climate change, impact on people, and there's a need for us to change around to more sustainable practices. A lot of CEOs have been punished for making those decisions, because it meant less
Yeah.
profitability in the short run.
For sure. And I think, you know, just to make it clear to anyone tuning in too, right, is that Kamla is talking about the short-term cost, right? We're seeing a lot of long-term benefits towards the bottom line when you do make that upfront investment. And I think, you know, finally we're starting to see the tide change a bit, and actually CEOs and CFOs be penalized if they're not making that investment. You're seeing a lot of things like CSR contracting, where bonus structures or salaries are being tied to social impact performance as well as financial performance of entities. So that's really, really interesting as well to see that shift. But yes, I mean, as a business owner that consults on this topic, it's been a long time of preaching these types of concepts and having these types of conversations to finally start seeing the traction that we're seeing, even just as a service provider. And, you know, just a sheer number of conversations that we have on a regular basis, even if they don't translate to clients, the sheer number of conversations is significantly higher, or is a significantly higher number than they would have been in the past. And that's also really encouraging. I think what's unfortunate is that we've shifted from, you know, climate change is real to we are in a climate emergency. And I think unfortunately, just as humans, we're pretty myopic creatures. And so we wait until we're in an emergency situation to respond. But I'm hopeful that given, you know, what we know now, we're going to respond as aggressively as we possibly can and make the necessary upfront investments, because, you know, it's not just our profitability, it's, you know, our ability to reside in this region, it's our ability to keep calling it home, and just have our businesses live on, right? It's so much about just being able to exist at baseline.
Yes, agreed. So I want to ask you another a question, Ali, because you work within the region and not just Jamaica. One of my pet thing is collaboration. How can organizations work together so that in pooling those resources and pooling your competencies, you can achieve so much more? Are you seeing a willingness on the part of organizations to say, let's develop a common
Together.
front? Yes, and let's see how we can use common resources that's then going to make it easier for us.
For sure, for sure. I think, you know, one of the challenges for our region has always been how challenging interregional travel is, and how, you know, prohibitively expensive it is, particularly when you're looking in the nonprofit space, or you're looking in the entrepreneurial space, it's challenging. But I recently attended the Caribbean Renewable Energy Forum, CREF, which is hosted by New Energy Events in Miami. And it was such a heartening experience to be a part of that conference, because so many regional players came together, and we didn't just do, you know, panel discussions. We had workshops, we had problem solving, you know, sessions. People made connections that they wouldn't have made ordinarily. I find the same thing with virtual settings as well, like Governance Week. It's why I encourage so many people to attend, because I think it gives you an opportunity to understand who is doing what and create like a little mapping for yourself. You know, I think what's being done with the climate accelerator map in the region is amazing, because it's mapping so many of the projects. I can share some of that information with you as well, just so that we can circulate to people. I have to shout out my advisor, Rachel Welch Phillips. She's been such an integral mentor for me in connecting me to regional players. She's in Trinidad, but she travels to Jamaica a lot. So we're able to have kind of, you know, an Eastern Caribbean perspective, you know, a Jamaican perspective. We're able to integrate more people into the conversation. But I think it all comes back to, you know, it's our collective willingness, and I think that does exist, but I think it's also our individual willingness to step outside of the societies that we exist in, outside of our bubbles, and say, somebody in Barbados or somebody in Trinidad must be doing what I'm doing. How can I work with them to do it bigger and to do it better? So that we don't, you know, double our efforts, but rather we consolidate them and make them exponentially more impactful. So I think the appetite is there. I think, as always, the logistics behind it are just a little bit more challenging than we would like. But the virtual world creates a whole new dynamic that I think will really enable it in a new way.
Yes, yes, and I'm absolutely proud of the work we've been able to do in bringing the region together.
Absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely.
it's really,
CCGI does an outstanding job of that. And it's such a privilege and an honor to be a part of the events that you all host.
thank you. Thank you, Ali. Now, I want to, as we come to the last few minutes of our half hour life, I want to talk about a very challenging issue now. So it's outside of your scope of responsibility with the work you do, but it's very directly related, and this is people behavior. So I have heard organizations lament that the cost of doing things that it's more climate friendly, that has a better social impact, is usually rejected by consumers because there's an additional cost attached.
Mhm.
How do we change people's mindsets so
Sure,
that we can build that
sure.
alignment between what customers are wanting, what the organizations are producing, which will be that road towards the circular economy concept, of trying to ensure there is a sustainability loop with
Sure.
with our use of resources. What would you say to have that?
So my radical, gut reaction to that is that corporations are the largest contributors to climate change, right? So what we do in our personal homes is a drop in the bucket as compared to manufacturers, any type of product-based business, right? Any large corporation, they are, emitting far more emissions than, any of us could dream to do, right? And so my response to businesses who say that the purchasers or the customers will not pay the cost of their transition is to stop passing off the cost on the customer, right? Because you passed on that cost to us for years by polluting into the environment, right? So to some degree, I think corporations need to absorb that initial cost of the transition. And I think, governments need to do that as well. Because climate change is an intersectional issue, right? So whatever, and all of these issues are intersectional, right? So, to ask communities that have been economically disadvantaged, for example, to pay higher electricity bills on the basis that our electricity company is going to be transitioning towards a more green future, that needs to be, in some way subsidized by the government or by multilateral organizations who are requiring this of these entities, such that it doesn't further financially disadvantage consumers. Certainly I think that in, the wealthier communities, taxation provides some of that financial support to governments to be able to meaningfully do that. But I think it's unfair, particularly to our most vulnerable consumers, to be passing off those costs. But on the side of behavioral change, I also think very similarly that, if we build it, people will come, right? So, for instance, in Jamaica, a lot of low-income communities aren't even provided with appropriate garbage collection, on a weekly, daily basis. So in order to ask people to transition towards recycling, we need to improve garbage collection, right? So, and put in place the systems and the access to those systems in order for people to be able to do so. So we need to empower people to make that change. And I think people are inherently inclined towards creating a change that's going to positively impact future generations, but we need to give them the opportunity to do so. And I know that's not the answer that I think corporations like to hear or governments like to hear, but it's how I feel.
Yes, yes, no, and you're absolutely right, because if we do produce the better quality products that are long lasting, then people would be willing to put out the additional cost. But as you say, it shouldn't be the full cost. It should be a subsidized cost because it's to everyone's benefit that we move in this direction.
Exactly.
Yes. So I'm happy that you are doing the work that you are doing, not just in Jamaica, but throughout the region. And I look forward to us being able to connect more and to see how can we share a lot of the lessons learned that you would have been collating over the years to help organizations be able to leapfrog. Because a lot of them are still caught up in, well, this is what works for me now. I know I need to change. But as you say, just as we understood with climate change, it was, we know we need to change, but we waited until it became a climate emergency.
Exactly, exactly. And, in so many of these conversations that I have, we talk about how we can create some shared resources. And maybe, Kamla, that's something that we can talk about, how we can create some shared resources for businesses across the region to really be able to tap into and hit the
Yes.
ground running with this type of work.
Yes, absolutely. That's sort of what I have in mind as we grow CCGI, that we should be able to also offer very tangible value in helping organizations when they partner together so that as a region we are able to grow and not be duplicating effort and wasting a lot of what can ordinarily then be transformed from what, as you said, we are among the most vulnerable nations right now. We don't need to be. We could make decisions that places us in a much better position.
For sure, for sure.
Right. So we have 3 more minutes remaining. Do you want to share any final thoughts with us as we come to the end of this governance live?
No, I mean, I think, just as you said that about how we can transform the region to being less vulnerable, I think it's so important for us to give kudos to the people who are not just managing the work, right? That in the way that we are, from a governance perspective, but the people who are carrying out and executing on the initiatives that we think are so critical, whether those be harbor cleanups, whether those be coral replanting,
Yes.
so many of these on the ground activities have to be carried out by people who are deeply passionate about this work. And, I'm just eternally grateful to them. And I'm really looking forward to this week of connecting with like-minded professionals about, how we can continue to create systems that enable progress in a more effective way, and how we can collaborate more effectively as well. So just as always, want to say thank you and stay in a place of gratitude for conversations like this and people doing this type of work.
Yes, thank you very much, Ali. So just to remind everyone, Governance Week, our theme this year, regenerative capitalism. How do we promote exceptional governance for our small states? And we are truly grateful to our sponsors as well. I'd like to mention our 2 gold sponsors, First Citizens Bank and the Massey Group. And also we have 5 bronze sponsors this year, Angostura Limited, Republic Bank, National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, PwC, and J.A. Rowe and Sons from Belize. I was posting on LinkedIn today, that as much as nonprofit organizations do a lot of work that fills gaps within society, it's helpful that these for-profit organizations support us with these financial contributions because it does make the work so much easier and lighter. So thank you very much, Ali. Thank you to everyone. I'm so excited. We are drawing closer to Governance Week 2024. And I know this year it's going to be absolutely exceptional. There's very few spaces remaining. I'm proud to say that too. We are almost at limit with our registrations for this week. So we are really happy with how it's progressing. So thank you all very much. And we will see you again tomorrow, by the way. Our live is going to be with our chairman, Nigel Romano. So take care. Bye now.
Bye.